All right, so in this demonstration, we're going to go through and we're going to make some wrapping paper. So the very first thing that I'm going to do whenever Illustrator comes up, I'm going to choose to use a new document, and I'm going to use inches, and the width of this is going to be 29 inches because I'm thinking that I can't print the whole way out to the end of it. I'll try 29.5 actually. So 29.5 inches wide, and we will go ahead and make it 48 inches long. So this, after I do this, and also since I'm printing, DMA students should know this at this point, if I'm printing, I'm going to use the CMYK color palette instead of the RGB one. So it's important that you set that to CMYK. So I say create, and in Adobe Illustrator it gives me this nice big artboard. Okay, so I'm going to do some random stuff. One thing I'm going to do is this gobbler that I have on the other screen. So I went through in Photoshop and I removed the background from this gobbler, and I saved it or exported it as a PNG file. So the significance of a PNG file is it does not have a background with it. And you'll see that whenever I bring it in here. So the way that I bring a photo into, or an image into Illustrator, is I go to File, Place, and I find the image. So right now I have it saved in these PNGs, and I choose Gobbler, and I place it. All right, so once I have it in here, I don't know exactly how big I want this to be, but I know it's not going to be that big. So I can do things like stretch this. So if I just grab hold of it and stretch it, then it gets distorted. So the easiest way to do this, and I can hit Control Z to go backwards, do undo. The easiest way to do this is to grab it and hold Shift while I'm stretching. So I'm going to do something like that. I don't know if that's big enough, but we're going to leave it something close to that for right now. Okay? So then the next thing in Photoshop, I'm going to do one of these just so that you can see how to do this. So I'm going to say open, and it opens up to the one that I already had set up. I'm going to choose largemouth bass, and I'm going to say open, and there's a little button off here to the side, and my workspace right now is graphic and web. So this little button right here, I'm going to do the object selection tool, and I'm just going to click on this like that. Now a lot of times if I don't have a really high contrast background, I have to go in and click on this select and mask button up here, and whenever I do this, I would at that point be able to come in here and modify what the selection is. So there's a transparency over here to kind of give you a perspective of what is being selected and what is not. And I can just hit escape to get out of that. This is a pretty good selection, so it's probably a bad one to actually show you how to fix this. Let's say I just wanted to remove the head from this. I could always come up here to the top while I'm in this selection mode, and I'm going to choose this minus button, and my tool right now is really big. So the size is 217, so I'm just going to bring it down to something like that, and you could make it even smaller to get more finer adjustment. And then if I do this, it goes through and removes more of the selection. So I could say enter and be done with it, right now I want this added back in, so you might get some selections where you need to add stuff in, and at that point I click the plus button and I go through and I add it in. And what you may or may not be able to see on the screen right now is that I added too much in. So whenever I zoom in here, I have some of this white background, which I do not want. So I'm going to choose that minus, and I'm just going to kind of skate around along the perimeter of the image there and remove as much of that as possible, and do the same thing on the bottom here. And then I'm going to zoom in on this part where the mouth is, and I'm going to make this selection tool small, and I'm just going to come in here, get rid of some of this stuff, make it even smaller down to a size 1, and remove some of that stuff from the mouth. I can zoom back out, and whenever I hit enter, it shows you what is selected. First of all, if I hover, what's not selected is pink, and what is selected is basically circled by these dancing ants. So at this point, I don't want to select this. What I want to do is I want to invert the selection. That's a little button right down here. And now this background is selected. So I'd like to just delete this. So whenever I hit the delete button, this is what's going to come up. Nothing. Or I will get this fill command right here. That's not what I want. So what I have to do first is I come over here to my layers, and I only have one layer called the background layer, and I click on that to unlock it, and then I'm going to delete that right there. I'm going to do one more little thing. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to try to refine those edges a little bit. So I'm going to do select and mask one more time, and I'll turn that transparency down a little bit, and I'm going to bump this up to like maybe 7. I'm just going to get a little bit closer, and I'm removing stuff that I don't want to remove. A little bit closer with that, and hit enter. Maybe a little bit better there, probably not though. All right, so at this point that I have no background on here, I can go to File, Export, Export As, and I can choose a PNG format so that I don't bring a background over. And I'm going to say Export, and as always, every time that you export something or save something, you should make a conscious effort to look to see where it's actually saving, because you're going to need to go back to that. So right now I'm using a downloads folder, and I'm going to put this in my PNGs folder, and I'm going to just call this Bass. And just to see how that worked, I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to File, Place, and I'm going to put the Bass in there, and it comes in without a background. You can see that real easily if I drag it up here off of our artboard. So maybe make this a little bit bigger, maybe arrange these like that. And another one that I had prepped already is a Travis Scott image, famous rapper. So I have a fish, a turkey, and a Travis Scott. And I would probably put some more in there as well. All right, so at this point, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, holding shift, making sure I get a nice proportion, Maybe bring this a little bit closer like that. Alright, then I'm going to select those, and I'm going to come up here to Object, Pattern, Make, Pattern. Patterns cannot contain linked objects. Please embed the objects and try again. So I'm going to have to embed these images for it to work. So I'm going to click on the image over here in my quick actions. I'm going to say embed and embed those, and I'm going to try the pattern again. Object, pattern, make, and now all of a sudden I have real interesting pattern there. So in here I want to fill this entire page with my pattern, and there's different types of patterns here that I can use. Something like that. I'm going to go ahead and stick with this grid pattern. And I'm going to, let's see, let's try playing around with the width and the height. And I think this is going to change the size of my actual pattern. Okay, and 6. So you can see whenever I do that, I basically get more spacing in between, which isn't bad. Down here, I'm going to do more copies. So I'm going to do something like 3 by 7. Let's try 7 by 3. So that's getting to be a lot closer what I want. 7 by 5. And I'm going to call this we'll call it Dixon's pattern. Okay. All right, so once I accomplish that, and then there's also this overlap stuff, which I don't see that changing a whole lot. So I'm just going to click out of that, and I'm going to move these off to the side for a minute. I'm going to make a rectangle now. So I'm going to choose this rectangle, and I'm going to go from up there to there. I'm going to change the color of the fill just so that you guys can see that I actually made something. So I'm going to choose something like a, let's try a green color maybe. It's rough. I can change my opacity a little bit. Maybe I make that 30%, give it a little bit of a shade. Yeah, not loving it. All right, so let's say I leave it at that. 50% opacity, which basically just changes the shade. So you could actually use a background image and have it faded out too. But if you're using a solid color, then you're probably just going to end up with a different color, a lighter color. All right, so now the next one I'm going to do another rectangle right there. And in this case, I'm going to double click on my fill, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to hover over top of these custom fills, and I now have one called Dixon's pattern. So I double click that and it fills the space. And I clicked off of it, sorry. Let's do that. So one more time, I'm going to click that. And that would be my wrapping paper. Okay, so then the next thing, the only other thing I really wanted to show you with this is I don't have to do a square pattern there, and I could do multiple different ones. So right now my fill is default to that, so I could literally do all kinds of different things with this. I'm going to use pen tool and just come up with some funky shape, and I'm going to choose that fill for that. So you don't have to just use a rectangle, but it's works very well for what we are actually doing. So you're kind of learning a couple things how to make the patterns, but for our case, the rectangle is probably going to be your best bet. And we can rotate this real easily like that as well. The final step will be to go through and actually print this to the Canon printer.